Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you very much for coming and joining us today. We're really excited about what we're doing over the next couple of quarters and how we're going to be delivering it. Slide. This looks like it's a lot that we're actually going to achieve through this webinar, but actually we're going to be aligning ourselves on what we think open energy is and it's not, but not necessarily agreeing fully on anything outcomes wise. We're going to align on the current perceptions, just kind of set up the conversation and think about what they are, the challenges of roles and language, and then understanding how the open energy working group is going to be formed and addressing the challenges going forward. To that end, this is not Chatham House rules, just so that you know, it's a webinar. It's going to be publicly shared after the meeting. So if there's something that you shouldn't say, please don't say it, but we'd always welcome open and frank conversation if possible. And if there are people that should be here and you want to share this with afterwards, please do let us know and we will make sure that they're added for future events like this. So next slide, just to recap on what we're here to do. Here's our vision, mission and values, things you've always are available for you to see. They're things that really define the work that we're doing, and we use them as our guidelines of what we're trying to achieve. We have a large number of organizations participating, either as observers or as participants. Ross, as you can see, we have some level of engagement across all of these organizations, and we're really grateful for all of you participating in the discussions that we're having. Right, so Sarah Vaughan couldn't be here, but she wanted to have a word.
Sarah Vaughan, I'm co-chair with Gavin of the Open Energy Steering Group. I'm really sorry that I can't be here with you today. It looks like a really interesting session and I think it's a great initiative. Just by way of background of where this has come from, it's actually been raised with us by certain DNOs, highlighting barriers that they are seeing to the sector moving forward with sharing data. And fundamentally, it's around lack of alignment, which is creating that barrier to progress. I think the concern arises around people wondering whether they are doing the right thing or whether their sort of colleague companies in the sector might be doing something different, and whether that is better or whether that may end up with what they are doing being a real sort of waste of time and effort. I'm not going to go into specifics on examples of where this is being raised, because I think that's something that will be covered in the session as you go through it. Now, one of the great things about this particular initiative, which I think sets it apart from others, is the fact that regulators are bought into it. So, if you like, they know it's happening, they are aware of it, and far be it from me to speak for a regulator, but I think it would be fair to say that there is some support from them, and a commitment to feedback if things are going off in the wrong direction. So I think that is an incredibly useful position to be in, because again it comes back to this fear of wasted time and wasted effort to go down a path that then is not where a regulator might want you to be. I think the other thing that this brings with it is the ability to engage with other stakeholders in the sector to ensure that this is going in the right direction for them. Again, to ensure that the sort of finished product at the end of the day is the best and most useful product for all of us. So I think that where we're trying to get to here is to identify those risks, identify those stumbling blocks, to have some sharing about where these things are coming up, and hopefully to build that alignment between you to ensure that we can get over this and past this and find an efficient pathway through it. And that might result ideally in a positioning paper that can be shared at the end of the process, both with regulators and other stakeholders, that is the result of a collaborative effort between you, where people have coordinated to give the sector a unified voice rather than there being lots of different approaches, which just makes it much, much more difficult for others to interact with the data sharing that is going on. And I think there's a real power in that. The fact that we will have involved through the process others in this should mean that this will align with the regulatory direction of travel that they would want to see. So I think that strength in working together is very, very powerful. And I hope that you will all bring to this a sort of a spirit of cooperation and of wanting to create something out of this that is really valuable for you as an individual company, but also for the sector as a whole. Because I think that message of the sector taking a lead to try and solve a common problem is a really powerful one. Anyway, I look forward to hearing feedback from the session and hopefully being involved in future discussions. Many thanks.
Fantastic. Over to you, Gavin.
Thank you, and thanks to Sarah for recording that, and she did send her apologies for not being here in person. So I think we're at a really interesting moment in the UK's history around data sharing at large. You know, we've got the Data Act that has passed this year, and for full transparency as well, I sit on the Smart Data Council. So a lot of our thinking has been, how does this interface with everything else that's going on in the country, not just within the energy sector? But just as a bit of background, just to orient ourselves, Open Energy was born out of UKRI funded programme and then has survived on both BEIS funding for a period, back when it was called BEIS, and is now 100% funded by industry. And so with members on the call, SSEN and National Grid, we're at the beginning, I think, of a really interesting data sharing journey. And the one thing that we do know, not just through the work we've done at Icebreaker, but with other initiatives that are some of them more mature, some of them very early around data sharing, collaboration is really the key. And it's very difficult, I think, to juggle all the different priorities of different parts of the policy landscape having an opinion about data. And having to move forward with confidence. And I think the one thing that I hear from industry all the time is, can we have policy certainty so that we know how we can best manage our investments? And so I just wanted to spend a little bit of a few minutes just saying what Open Energy has done and what we are here for. So firstly, Open Energy is an initiative that has been run by Icebreaker One. Icebreaker One itself is an independent non-profit public benefit company. So we're here to meet the needs of the market. And Open Energy has been co-designed by its members, and it really is here to satisfy the needs of what are the market needs here that can be developed in a pre-competitive way to enable data sharing. There needs to be lots of value exchange around data, but there are certain things that will just reduce cost and friction for everybody in the mix. How that then interfaces with the different policy landscapes is a moving target at the moment. And I think that's part of the reason for today's call, is to start trying to join together initiatives that we've all got the same ambition of enabling data sharing, of keeping costs and friction to a minimum, while not accidentally giving away loads of value along the way. So to that end, Open Energy now really does two things. It brings people together to work on the rule books for data sharing, what we call schemes, and we've got voluntary data sharing schemes now at the moment, which are multilateral contracts that determine everything from the technical needs to the liability frameworks and legal conditions and so on. And then we operate a trust framework as a service underneath all of that that does a very thin layer of things. And the big challenge in that work, and Chris on the call is the lead on that, is how little can it do to be useful so we don't accidentally compete with the commercial world. So at one level, and Chris will touch on this later, it does the minimum viable trust framework to enable people to trust each other and share data. So in the mix here, we have an emerging landscape, and hats off to Charlie and Liam and the people at Ofgem for pushing things forward. I know how hard that has been. It's been a long journey with lots of consultations, and there's lots of commercial development as well. But when we look at the landscape, and this really came to the fore at the last Open Energy Steering Group meeting, where we asked the question, what's the Venn diagram between DESNZ and Ofgem, between RETCO, SETCO, and other code bodies in the mix? How does that interface with the work of Elexon, with Electrolink? How does that all interface with the work of the Smart Data Council and the Data Act, and the work that DCIT and DBT have been running? And I'd say that Venn diagram certainly isn't clear to me. If someone does have one, that'd be super. That we can accelerate quickly. But I suspect there's a lot of conversations to be had in there, and the collection of organisations that we've managed to bring together under the Open Energy umbrella, I think we're here as a neutral space to try and have some of these conversation and facilitate them. And like I say, this is kind of beginning of the next phase of data sharing at national scale. And in the middle of that, we've got some flagship programs. There's one that takes smart meter data that is now being used by the banks to underwrite green lending. So there's a cross-sector data initiative that's using energy sector data today. So these are all in flight, and regulators are moving at a macro level to now address, or the government departments are moving at macro level to address the Data Act, the significant budget released for government to start designing smart data schemes. And more broadly, we need to think about this in terms of how do we unlock data sharing. So I'll come on to a bigger picture view in just a second, but just to frame one analogy here, a metaphor that we sort of came up with, things are a lot better than they used to be. Right, we have come a long way. It isn't the case anymore where we've got one set of organizations building with Lego and another set of organizations building with Meccano. We have, at least I think, got people mostly building with Lego. However, we've got different brands of Lego, and the Lego bricks don't necessarily fit together. So when we talk about interoperability, and by interoperability, I don't just mean technical interoperability, I mean legal interoperability, liability, consent frameworks, etc., we're going to have to be cross-sector interoperable. And we don't have those conversations going at the right level yet, I would argue. And that brings us back to how are we having those conversations in each sector, both within the energy sector. Icebreaker also co-chairs and helps run the Stream Initiative in the water sector. We're working with the banks and so on. There's lots of parallels between all of the sectors of people not quite knowing exactly the direction of travel within their own sector. And that makes it doubly hard to work out what it cross-sector looks like. So I think if we just go to the next slide there, I'll just do one more bit of narrative. So earlier this year, we created this graphic just to try and help us frame our conversations about what do we mean by a connected, data-enabled economy. Because ultimately we should be asking the question, what's the market architecture here for data sharing? And to that end, we can see people have got, going from the left, isolated databases. They might connect them with other things in a bilateral context, maybe with a dozen other partners. And then you go up the scale here to interoperable solutions, and you can look at initiatives out there like Credo and things where you've got good interoperability emerging, but we don't have that in a really nationally scalable way. And so I look to things like open banking, which is regulated. It is mandatory for the sector. It's got 15 million monthly active users in the UK right now, and it's been adopted in open banking has now been adopted in over 90 countries, and in 60 of them it is regulated. But that's just within a single sector. So our provocation with this diagram, and as with all of our initiatives here at Icebreaker, it's a provocation and it will be subject to adaptation based on reality, is how do you do this in a cross-sector way? And so the examples here of what could be a 4, open banking is a 4, open energy is an emergent 4, but it's by no means across the whole market. The program that we're running around green lending goes from energy to finance, so that's an emergent 5, but it's still early days, and then there's lots of lessons to be learned from that. So I thought it was useful to just throw up, we can drop the link as well into the chat, but I thought really the big question here, and there's some really important decisions that I think need to be wrestled with over the next 6 to 12 months. Because at a macro level, you've got the Data Act in place. DBT is pushing forward, or will be pushing forward, with its national strategy for data sharing, and that has a cascade impact on everyone. In that roadmap, it goes open banking to open finance to energy, property is a bit ahead, and so on. And in parallel to all of this, Ofgem has actually gone ahead and started mandating data sharing infrastructure. So energy is a bit ahead of the curve, and is that's fantastic, and I'm super delighted with. And it's going to carry with it some things we haven't thought of. So we're going to have to somehow work out how we navigate through some of the things that are coming at us here. And open banking itself is shifting under the regulatory banner of the FCA. So there's lots of moving parts here. And I think the only way I've ever found of navigating this is actually just let's grab everybody together and see where we can stimulate new conversations and find use cases that demonstrate why this is all important. And so if I've got one ask from today is, as we go away from this, think about what use cases we could all work on together to work out what is pre-competitive and how does that reduce cost and friction for everybody in our own business cases inside our own organizations. So with that, I'll pass back to you, Julia.
Thanks very much, Gavin. Great framing. Gets us those thoughts starting to collide in my own head, never mind anyone else's, and so that we can try to think about what some of the challenges are. We've got Chris, who's going to take us on.
Thanks very much, Julia. Hi, everyone. My name's Chris Poynton. I'm the product manager for trust services at Icebreaker One. And amongst things that I'm doing at the moment is I've been working quite closely with 2 of Icebreaker One's partners, SSE and NGED, talking about their own data sharing initiatives and starting to try and spec out what a aligned approach to that might look like. And in this section, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're finding, some of the signals we've been picking up from those conversations, and some ideas for how we might use open energy to actually move the needle on them and get to more consensus within the industry on some of these definitions. So next slide, please, Ross. Just a recap. Those of you that are regulated by Ofgem will be very wearily familiar with ED3, and I won't belabor it too much, but tucked up in the ED3 framework decision from back in April is this section 622. The sector faces challenges in data sharing and collaboration with inconsistencies in data quality and accessibility across different DNOs. And that's really very much the observation that we want to try and make not an observation that it would make in a few years' time. That's Open Energy's kind of role here. So I'm going to point out a couple of places where we're seeing some of those inconsistencies, just to highlight the sort of things we'd like to bring people together to talk about. So on the next slide, thank you, Ross. This is great. I feel like I'm doing a COVID announcement. This is SSE's data portal and they're publishing data about their substations. Now, in common with all of the other DNOs, This is behind a light login requirement, which was following Ofgem communication last year or 2 years ago, I think now, ensuring that that was a requirement for detailed geospatial data about assets. But you can see that this is being published, though it's behind a login, with a Creative Commons attribution 4, which is an open license. And in fact, they are using IB1 assurance levels. You can see a little D1 in the yellow lozenge at the top there. It means dataset level 1 assurance. And it has a sensitivity class of open. Data sensitivity classes basically describe in a fairly simple way what sensitivity of data is being published. And so open is the least sensitive. If I can go on to the next one, this is National Grid's data portal, similarly behind a login. But National Grid, because there's a login in front of it, have determined that they feel that this is a shared data license. There is no limitation on use of the data beyond access, but there is an access control on it, and they consider this to be a shared data license. Well, next slide along. This is a similar data set published by UK Power Networks, and they've gone, again, it's behind a login, but they've gone the same route as SSE have. So they've got that CC BY4, which is the Creative Commons attribution license, the same one that SSE are using. So I think it's a minor thing in some ways, but even between 3 DNOs, we have 2 who've chosen one route and 1 that's chosen another. SSE and NGED have not been able to, they've done the login, but we're not sure, at least I'm not sure from conversations with them, what is the intent of that login? What will be the necessary controls on anybody's access that might come from that? What would happen if they told someone they couldn't have it, having logged in because of some reason that we don't know about? We feel there's a lack of clarity about the purpose of the login and whether the license is truly open. And it's not something that we can just rule on. It's something that we need to just get our heads together and work out. And the reason this is important is it's all plays through to people's confidence in accessing the data, and in particular, people's ability to take cross-boundary, cross-DNO data sets and use them confidently together with knowing that they're not breaching a license in one DNO that they haven't got from another DNO. So this is one of, it's possibly a small thing, but I wonder if it is. Often these things aren't once you actually dig into them. That's one of the conversations we'd love to open up. I'm going to move on to a slightly knottier or wider scope situation that's in the industry at the moment, which is when we move on to what's for shared data. So shared data, just to recap, is another one of our data sensitivity classes. So we had open previously, and we now have shared. Shared means that you are publishing it, but there are restrictions on either access, use, or onward sharing on it. And so shared data licensing has been a big focus of the Energy Networks Association, and indeed the ODI published, I think in September, the report supporting a common approach to shared data licensing across the UK's energy networks, which is brilliant. And it's a really great start at constructing data sharing agreements in a structured, cohesive way that means that there's a likelihood that energy data publishers can actually sort of come up with the same answers to the same questions about what data use should be permitted under the data licensing. But it so it has some common fields to be filled in as part of an order form for a shared data license, and having those items there are very much recognizable from us as looking at how we create preemptive licenses. These are really common items you need to know. The thing where we feel that this work is a starting point as opposed to a getting off point is that it's still very much based on bilateral agreements, which means that there are the person requesting the data has to fill in an order form saying what they're going to do with it, and then the data publisher, the DNO, says, okay, you can have it for these purposes that we've set out in the order form. And there isn't really clear signals ahead of that as to whether this data would be permitted to a person of type X or organization of type Y for purpose of type Z. That in itself means that you can end up with the same data coming out on different shared data licenses with problems again with using it in combination with other similar data sets from other publishers. And it also means that it's not clear to people using the data whether they're going to get it or not, which makes planning and investment harder to get. So I think the Energy Networks Association, I'm not going to put words into their mouth, but in the report, if we can go on to the next slide, there were some next steps. Very much this was seen as the start of a process, and I think the Open Energy feels very much the same way about it. That it's made a great line in the sand to start to build around. And the next steps from the ENA document were to test and iterate the license and explore additional clauses, more user engagement. And we very much want to put Open Energy forward to say we can really help with many of those intended next steps for the ENA, and can help to maybe extend a little bit into the data governance and shared data work that we've done previously as part of Open Energy through the MEDA process and other projects. So we've had some ideas for what we might think about to sort of build upon this work. And if I go to the next slide, please. Some ideas. The first one at the top there is assurance. We have, as I mentioned earlier, SSE, and currently I'm working towards publishing open data with assurance. The assurance framework they're using is actually entirely applicable to shared data as well. And one quite quick win, we think, would be to be able to find the mechanism by which we can add assurance to data that's published with the shared data license and agreements. Because at the moment, the license, the agreement alongside the license has very little assurance. In fact, it said you shouldn't rely on the data for decision making, which seems like it could be a little, that there's a possibility to add to that. Building on that, then there's things like common identity services. If we all are trying to publish things for local authorities to use for local area energy plans, it would be great if local authorities could identify themselves consistently across all DNOs, be KYC, know your customer, so you can tell who they are, and can be accredited to get certain data so they can just turn up with their credentials and get the data without having to fill in a lot of forms that may ask them very different questions and come to different determinations. That again comes to standardized access permissions and mechanisms using that identity information. There's things like shared data subclassification. There may be types of shared data that we can use that will help in the decision-making process, that we can identify types of shared data. Oh, this is one of those types that we share with this sort of people for these purposes. And if we can start to build those clusters, again, you get a consistency of approach and a confidence in data use. The machine-readable license representations rely on that to some extent, I think, because in order to make something truly machine-readable, it can't be minted from whole cloth every single time. It needs to come from a known library with known meanings. And that then enables you to have preemptive licenses, which means that people can decide within schemes, data sharing schemes, that if they meet the requirements to access the data and use it for their purposes as within the scheme, they can simply get on with that. There is no additional agreement needed. The scheme agreement covers all of the data use that they're permitted to have within the scheme. Some bits further down, provenance. In order to see where data comes from, you need to know have the identity services to see who published it and where it's been in the meantime. That's a very important consideration for assurance further down the line when you get into more detailed use cases. Both the ENA document and the current state of Open Energy exclude personal data, but Perseus has been handling personal data in the guise of smart meter data, and we've come a long way in the last 2 years in the Perseus project in terms of being able to data license personal data, and we think there's a lot to be applied here potentially as well as part of an energy sharing, a shared data approach. And then finally, commercial terms. Very important for us to be able to properly apportion value and to ensure that people are compensated for appropriately for data that they're publishing. I think there's, I know that from the Smart Data Repository at the moment, there is a consultation around about the financial framework for that. I think it's an important conversation to have and one that we can help to support as well. So the overall idea is for us to take these topics that we can consider about data sharing, and they're sort of wider governance topics, not the mechanics of getting the data published, and rapidly come up with some schemes to identify some use cases, to identify user needs as well, both the publishers and consumers of data, and bring forward the priority use cases next year to design solutions for them, no doubt iteratively, and to start the ball rolling on an ongoing program of improving collaboration and data publishing across the industry. Thank you. Back to you, Julia.
Thank you, Chris. Fantastic.
Could I just come in, Julia,
Yes,
before we move on?
yes.
So for me, and apologies, Ken Jones from National Grid here, there was something missing on that list of things for me. In terms of aligned definitions was something that I'd like to see on that list, because when we were looking at the slides with the portals on, I think all three mentioned substation. The problem I have is, do we as a DNO population, or even the wider energy industry, have a common language associated with such things? The answer is maybe, but who knows, kind of thing. And one of the things that you mentioned trust around data sets as well. And for me, until we can get those common definitions set across all of our published artifacts, when it comes to further analysis and further value driving, unless we have those common definitions and agreements around them, the value is going to be diminished, because the sub-attributes associated with a substation could be different, for instance, and it would diminish trust if SSE's definitions were different to National Grid's. And I think that's something that I really feel passionately that needs to be part of that list of things that we need to do.
Perfect. Ken, you preempted me there. I was about to jump in and start talking about alignment on language, which I meant to do earlier. No, you're absolutely right. And I think, the challenge there, I think I've observed over decades, is it's very easy to disappear into an ontology room and come out 4 years later with a new definition of a thing. In the meantime, everybody else has got on with it, and it's baked into a billion different systems in a different way. So the only way we found of navigating that clearly is to say, let's pick a use case together, work it through, and then have an advisory group, a technical advisory group, as part of the conversation. There's a broad spectrum of business case, use case, technical, legal, communications, policy. There's 5 pillars to everything that we do here. And that technical advisory group and working groups underneath it can say, for this use case, this is the way that we can harmonize. I avoid using the word standardize.
Yes.
Because the second you've got, let's have one standard to harmonize them all, you've got N+1 standards. But if we say, for this use case, we can harmonize around this. Now, if that is successful, you can say, oh, that worked. Should we do it for something else? So psychologically and operationally, it's easier to adopt rather than trying to come up with thou shalt do 10 commandments at the top. And I think that applies across lots of different bits of new language. We have thrown around a lot of terms today on this call. Trust framework. Are we all aligned on what that does and what it doesn't do? Definitely not, right? We have a definition, which is on our website. We can drop the link in, that which association has picked up and said it's that. But we know there are operators out there who say, oh no, it does a bit more than that, and a bit more, and a bit, it's slightly different, etc. We've got an opinion on that. Now, it is just an opinion. What is a scheme? Well, there's another nice word. So government defines schemes, like open banking is a scheme that applies across a whole market. If you talk to some policymakers, will say government creates schemes. Industry doesn't do that. And I was like, well, actually, they do. We've got one called Perseus, which is getting energy data into the financial sector, and it's called the Perseus scheme. Now, under the hood of that, from my perspective, the same things are happening. People are looking at, how do you implement this? What are the common rules of the roads? What's pre-competitive, etc. So all of the actual practical things happen, but it leads to confusion. And I think that's one thing. We're only going to solve that, with explicit use cases that we turn into case studies. So we can say, in this example, it worked like this, and now we have 50 of them, and they're all common. Then we have something that is defined, that is more, again, harmonized through utilization and application than theorized and maybe is still wandering around looking to be implemented.
Yeah, that makes sense, Gavin. I mean, yeah, the other thing going around my head was giving absolute clarity on metadata. And again, once you've got absolute clarity on what you're referring to, then the actual kind of inconsistencies become obvious. So that's another way of getting around it. But yeah, use case approach driven. That's good.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, our definition of scheme is the rule book. Right? What's the multilateral agreement that includes technical, legal, policy, all of those different things, dialed up or dialed down based on the actual application. And in some instances, like Chris used the open data scheme there, that applies just to all data. It's not use case specific, but there aren't very many of those where you've just got a general thing that can be broadly applied. Because as soon as you want to restrict something in any way, somebody has an opinion. And it's usually a legal opinion, not just a technical opinion, or a liability opinion, or a national security question, or something like that. So I think that it's a really important question for us to navigate through. And again, why one of the reasons we created Open Energy was to help facilitate these conversations, and we'll come on to that more in a moment, I think. Encourage more questions, and please feel free to jump in.
I was just going to jump in and just kind of reiterate that use case led approach, I think, has to be the way forward, without trying to do it at such an enormous scale that we have already tried across ENA and across DNOs and other partners. It can become very bogged down into the detail of what does this mean? What does that mean? How do you derive that? And that sort of detail is just then what stalls everything. Whereas if we're delivering towards that use case, we can tailor towards the end consumer, towards the end benefit, and as you say, align through that specific data set, use case, end consumer, and get to that common definition. I think also then coming back to the point of metadata is what is it that we are describing when it comes to metadata? Is it the data that's contained within the data set, the product, the information that's being shared? Is it how that data set is being described through the likes of Dublin Core or DCAT or whatever other standards are out there? And making sure that, you know, we may all have individually different definitions internally, but how do we start to bring that together? They don't necessarily have to align at an internal level across all these organizations, but certainly in an external level, you know, almost that sort of layer in which we can kind of say, yes, we are all agreed that when this is accessed from the third party, from outside of these internal organizations, that we agree that this is that common definition.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you for adding that in. And again, that's you raised a key point there about the presentation layer at the API level can be the interface that says we're going to harmonize for this application in this way, and then whatever is happening internally is up to the organization, right? But there's a harmonization layer there. And you can have different harmonization layers. I'll put this differently. We do have different harmonization layers today. That's what I mean by the Lego bricks are different. Over time, we just need a process to say, well, actually, can we look across some of these and make them more compatible with each other? And that, again, not just at a technical level, but as Chris's example highlighted, at a licensing level. Because you can have technical access to whatever you like and have that all solved, and then trip up immediately because lawyers say no, or the legal conditions say maybe, and there's nothing worse than a maybe in a project to kill it stone dead. Rich or Charlie brings just some of the lessons learned. You know, this has been a long journey. You've been an observer on the open energy journey for years now, and helped us work out what some of the things it should do and shouldn't do. What's your kind of observations so far?
Well, I think I was resisting the temptation to join in on that previous conversation about whether we need absolute interoperability of all taxonomies, glossaries at all. And whilst I don't have decades on this journey, I appear to be speedrunning it because we've come to the same conclusions. I started off when I was first given data best practice thinking the kind of pinnacle of the pyramid, the eventual ambition would be a shared energy sector-wide taxonomy of all data and a shared glossary where everyone used the same words to mean exactly the same thing. And as we're moving more towards this landscape of DSIs and data preparation nodes being able to switch around, I don't think that is necessary or even desirable anymore. And the point that was raised, I'm sorry, I missed who said it, but the internal and external landscapes and the shared external definition, which can only come from the conversations like we're having in this room, I think it's very critical. I'd be interested to know how this proposed shared data license that the ODI is put up with, which I'm reading in the background, would interact with the data sharing infrastructure. I think that would be a very interesting set of interactions. But no, it definitely seems like it's heading into a direction we would happily cheer on, and obviously based on things like data best practice and similar. So
Right.
good to
Thanks,
see.
Charlie. Well, I'll pick up on that. If we wanted to kick the tires of the DSI and how it might adopt a scheme, because the ODI thing is more of a template than a detailed definition. But we could take something like the open data scheme that we've developed through Open Energy and say, how would that be implemented within the DSI? And equally, if there are other schemes that have been developed, how could we implement them using the Open Energy Trust Framework? And I think those are both good questions about the interoperability. And what we have done architecturally is separate out the implementation of schemes, the rulebooks, from where they get implemented. So as we go forward, lots of different people will define voluntary schemes, and we should be able to. Industry needs to be able to run forward with their own use cases. And government will also define its own schemes. And as we move forward, some of those will be cross-sector, and who governs them is yet to be determined, I think. But the key here is to atomize the problem, is to split it into its different kind of functional layers, and then say, okay, who's responsible for governance of a particular scheme? Who will get together and actually define what it is, and then who can implement it? And that's where this sort of market architecture and that NOVA diagram, we're trying to stimulate the conversation around, because it forces that kind of thinking to the front and takes it beyond the technical questions about, who's got the best ontology on earth. Everybody. Yeah.
Everyone's loves their own. And I do want to apologize for my wincing when you said, what's the definition of a scheme? Because I spent an interminable conversation, about 45 minutes, of people throwing the ball around. What actually is a scheme? There were diagrams and everything. It was painful.
I know. We've all been through equivalent pain, and I think part of it is looking out to the emergent market and saying, we've been through quite a lot of this pain already. Please don't do it again, because it's quite painful. We could either do something useful with it, or we could do the next part of the pain, which is coming at us, and that's going to be a similar journey, I think, as well. But we can go far together, I think, is the key.
So yes, a minute ahead of time. What are the chances of that happening? We are going to have more conversations like this, and this is a webinar, not a meeting as such, but it's good to have the feedback loop that you're giving us already, and I think it's going to make for very interesting conversations at the working groups that are coming up. So next up we have a poll, is that right, Charlotte? So we'd love to hear from you. If you could fill this in.
So just to walk through those questions, first one is, how confident do you feel to publish or use shared data? And that's an open text box if you want to fill in something like that. And then we've got a few other questions. Charlotte, I wasn't sure if you were taking us through them, or have I just jumped in?
No, please do jump in, Gavin. I'm just the
Okay.
facilitator.
Okay, thank you. And then the second question here is, which of the barriers affect your confidence? And you can select multiple elements there, whether it's data licensing or technical or legal, or just internal data maturity. We hear this from across sectors, not just within the energy sector. How aligned do you feel your approach is with the NOVA principles that we put up earlier? And if you're not quite sure what they are, I'd still love to get a sense. Please tick the not sure if you're not sure, and we can follow up. And then what question would you like to take back into your organization? Obviously, we're here to help facilitate that as much as possible as well. And so we want to be able to represent some of the sentiment, and obviously the poll results will be anonymous when we publish them.
Right, could you potentially reword that last poll question on what question to take back into our organisation?
I'm
And
not
how,
sure.
yeah, how would you reword that, Michael?
Well, I guess that's what I'm asking for is, in terms of that question to take back into our organisation around that, looking to try and see how we can solve the issue we have with licensing and shared licensing.
Yeah, I think that if I can help there. So the question is really, I mean, we've touched on lots of different ideas. We want to, the end point that we're all trying to get to is low cost and friction data sharing across not just the energy sector, but across multiple sectors. So what's the biggest barrier effectively or challenge question that we could take back in? Is it around, we need to see very clearly articulated use cases that can be transformed into case studies, and the substation example earlier might be one? Or is it we don't have a coordinated, joined up data strategy within our own organization? How do we best collaborate with others so we don't spend the next 5 years doing it internally before we speak to anybody externally? And here we've got obviously a huge amount of money to be saved by talking to everybody else on this call to say that don't go. Here's 100 rabbit holes not to go down. Those kind of questions. What's going to create the internal icebreaker question? Maybe is a good framing. And then we can help provide some evidence and support around those questions and some narrative that you can then use as support to that question. Does that help, Michael?
Massively, thank you.
Fantastic. If you haven't had a chance or you need to think about those a bit further, we'll share a version of this in the email that follows this webinar today so that you can participate and give them a bit more thought if you need to. But it would be good to have your feedback. And then I think we're going to move on to you, Jakob.
Great, thank you. Thanks everyone. It's been a really good discussion today. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what happens next and what the kind of next stages of this process are. So today we, really wanted to just kind of put out there some of the key areas on which alignment is required and on which a lack of alignment is causing challenges. And it's really good to get a few more ideas on that already from the discussion. The next phase, Ross, maybe you just go to the next slide. On this is going to be to convene some really sort of active discussions in working groups with DNOs in order to take some of those priority areas and actually work towards that alignment and consensus in the sector. So we're going to do a number of these, at least 2, and then depending on kind of feedback and how we get on, we may do more than that. The first one, we've already got a date set for, so that's going to be on the 26th of November. That's a Wednesday, 2:30 p.m. to 4 p.m. So you can already put a block in that if you want to attend, and we'll get invites out really soon on that. But the purpose of the working group meeting is going to be to align around some language and some decisions on some key areas that we discussed today. And based on the discussions that were had today, and we'll also evaluate the outcome of the poll to set agendas for those working groups and really focus on the things that are most important in the short term. As an output of these, we will be, this was mentioned by Sarah, we'll be creating a positioning paper kind of with the voice of the sector, and that will be made available to external stakeholders and regulators so that there's real visibility of what is the sector's voice, what is the sector proposing. That can then invite some feedback and some suggestions, but also it can build confidence within the sector to actually implement the approach that's been agreed in the full knowledge that external stakeholders have awareness of it and are happy with it. So the ask is to complete the form on participating in this workshop. So there's the link there. I think one of the team can put a link, thank you, in the chat as well. And we will follow up with this link as well. So it's a really, really quick form just to register your interest in participating. Please complete this as soon as possible because we'd like to get invites out. We're going to close this on Monday at noon, but if you can, please get this done as soon as possible before that. Also, just a note for anyone that may watch the recording of this, so that isn't watching this live. If you haven't had a chance to watch this recording before Monday, the 27th of October at noon, but you would still like to participate, please do get in touch with us by email, and we can see if we can work something out to get you involved. So that was just, yeah, that's the next steps. About a month from now, we'll hold this first working group, and we'll hold subsequent ones after that. So I think that's all from me, and am I handing back to you, Julia, or
Yes.
Gavin? No, that's out. All right, take it away.
I'm going to ask Gavin if you'd like to say any last words.
Firstly, just thank you for your time today. This is we're in a really critical moment, I think, in the timing and evolution of data sharing in the UK. There's lots of activity all over the place, and obviously with the Data Act passing, everybody is coming out the woodwork and saying that they do all things to do with data. In the middle of all of that, we need to have a coordinated and collaborative effort with quite a firm hand on the tiller to make sure that we can navigate towards that low cost, low friction future that we all set out to achieve. But thank you very much for your time today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks, Gavin. You put it very succinctly. I'd like to thank you all as well for attending, and to remind you that we have a constellation and we'd love to have you participate in our network with us. Just to give you a little quick anecdote in the last minute is that today it was used by the IB1 team to look for people for projects that are coming up. So it's a really useful place for us to connect and to find each other, and that isn't sort of getting bogged down in having to update something on your LinkedIn on a regular basis, for instance. So if you can and you're interested, please follow the QR code. Yes, it is 2025, and yes, we are still using QR codes, and Gavin has designed a very pretty one, so we'd love you to follow that through. So last but not least, I'd like to thank the rest of the IB1 team, Chris and Gavin and the team supporting us for delivering this webinar. We look forward to many more of these very interesting conversations and for us to be getting somewhere with some actions. So we'll see you soon on the other side. Have a great rest of the day.